So we're here in Montana with Mr. Ed Griffin, one of the really big leaders in the freedom movement. Ed, thank you so much for being with us. So today we had the Red Pill Expo. I'm just curious, what were your thoughts on that? Did it go well? What were your thoughts on the speeches, the reaction from the audience, and everything else?
Well, this big smile on my face is because I thought it went exceptionally well. It's been a long time in the making. I've had a dream for many years of building a movement, a true movement that would unify so many different diverse elements of the freedom movement. And when I call it the movement in this case, it's not a solid movement, because we've had people who have been struggling against the oppression of government regulations and rules and limited freedom, but they didn't realize that they had something in common. You know, they were all concerned with their own issues, and I always felt it was a terrible thing that they couldn't somehow become unified, but not to the extent of giving up their own identities, giving up their own leadership, their own issues, their own style. You know, everybody's got, a different attitude toward things, but the one thing that was common to them all is that their freedom to express themselves and the freedom to pursue their issues that they thought were so important was severely limited, and becoming more so daily by rules and regulations coming down from the state. Just as an example, see, I'm a little bit tired, I'm repeating myself, but just for example, many people, increasingly numbers of people for quite a while, have been becoming concerned about vaccines. I just picked this out of the thin air. This is one of many issues. They have come to the realization, at least in their conviction, that vaccines are really not good, and that we've been sold a bill of goods about how good they were and how they're preventing diseases and so forth. And they're beginning to suspect that maybe there's a financial motive behind this whole thing, because you can get everybody taking vaccines, and if it's all paid for by the government, which means taxes, and nobody questions what the price is, this is a tremendous bonanza for the pharmaceutical companies. And then you think, well, is that a possibility? And then you look and you see that all of the congressmen and senators who are voting for these things to make vaccines mandatory now, they're getting huge donations from the pharmaceutical manufacturers. The people that make the vaccines have been paying the legislators to pass this legislation and so forth. And once you begin to see that pattern, you say, oh my gosh, I better go back and look at the science a little bit more carefully. So people have been doing that, and increasingly they've been saying, I don't want that for myself. I certainly don't want it for my little infant, my kids, but so I'll just opt out of the system. Well, now it's coming to the point where your freedom to opt out of the system is being severely challenged. And in some places, like in California now, they won't even allow you to opt out. You have to do it. If you don't, you'll go to prison. Well, so everywhere you look, when people, have something that concerns them, whether it's the health industry or their money in banking or whatever, their options to opt out are being limited, so that now the laws force you to accept the things that you do not want and do not believe in. And so I think increasingly people are realizing that that element is the common denominator to all of their problems. So if you look at it that way, we suddenly do have a basis for creating true unity over a wide, broad scope within the freedom movement. That's what it's all about, and that was my dream. I've been trying to find a way to do that for years, and the idea came to my mind just a year and a half ago, that people need to take the red pill about all these things, and that, yeah, we should have a Red Pill Expo. And then we all looked at each other and said, the red pill, what did you say, the Expo? Sounds pretty good, And it happened just like that. And so the idea expanded. And so the Red Pill Expo is a place where people who have taken many different kinds of red pills and awakening see now that what they used to believe in is a total illusion, and now they see reality. And by bringing them together under one big ideological tent, they get to meet each other, they find there's common cause, they get to network with each other, they can form coalitions, they can get things done, they can help each other, they can help fund each other, and all of a sudden we have the basis for a true movement, not just this ideological thing that we all agree now and then on something, but we really have an ability to move as one, and for the first time in history, we are able to confront the juggernaut of this movement of collectivism. Now, that word may not sound familiar to many people, but collectivism, as we use it here, is the generic word for all of these different nostrums that we call socialism, communism, fascism, Nazism, all liberalism, left wing, and so forth, even extreme right wing. All these things, these totalitarian concepts, which are supposedly justified on the basis that it's for the greater good of the greater number. They all have that commonality to them. All of those are pretty much the same. The generic word is collectivism. So once people realize that collectivism is their common foe, and the opposite of collectivism is individualism, they realize that that is their salvation. For the first time in history, there's a basis for a true unification of the freedom movement. So, how do I feel about it? Look at the smile on my face. I feel very good about it.
Wonderful. Somebody asked at the conference who here has read Ed Griffin's book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, and it seemed like every hand in the audience went up. That was amazing. Since you wrote that book, obviously it's had a tremendous impact. What's the status with the monetary system, and what does that mean for the future of the United States and of liberty?
Well, the status of the monetary system, as I see it, is pretty much what it was when I wrote the book, except it's worse. If we just look at a snapshot, we can say it's worse than it was back when the first edition of the book was written. But if you look at it as a moving target, it's the same, because it's been accelerating all this time. So maybe the rate of acceleration is increasing slightly. But the reason I try to make a distinction is that nothing really basically has changed in the fundamentals. The fundamentals are that the monetary system is in the hands of a private banking cartel. It's not a federal agency at all. It's a cartel. It's just like a coffee cartel or an oil cartel. It happens to be a banking cartel. And this cartel was so clever and so influential politically back in 1913 when the Federal Reserve Act was passed into law, that they were able to get the congressmen and the senators to pass the Federal Reserve Act, which in essence was nothing more or less than a cartel agreement. It was an agreement. First of all, we must understand it was written by members of the cartel. The Federal Reserve Act was written by the bankers, not by the congressmen or the senators that sponsored the bill. We see that all the time today. But in those days, it was not quite so common. But it's clear now, and the record on that is very, very clear, that the Federal Reserve Act was the brainchild of the bankers themselves. The very people that supposedly the Federal Reserve Act was supposed to control was written by those people, you see. So it was a brilliant move. It was a brilliant strategy, and they got these idiots in Congress to take the cartel agreement, all for their benefit, the bank's benefit, and they got a big eraser mentally, figuratively speaking, and they erased off the word cartel agreement. And they wrote in Federal Reserve Act and passed it into law. And so now all of us have to live by the terms of a private banking agreement written in the language of legislation. And if we disobey the wishes of the private cartel, we are thrown in prison because we violated the law. And therefore, people assume that Federal Reserve is a government agency because only government can put you in prison, right? Wrong. Private cartels can do it also if they get the government to pass their agreements, their cartel agreements, pass those into law. And so that is one of the red pills, for example, that people need to take. It's just one of many, you see. They have to realize that this illusion they have about their money system is just exactly that. It's just an illusion, and that the reality is really quite horrible. And that's the reason that every time there's an economic crisis, and the crisis is caused primarily by the banks getting into trouble. The banks are losing money. The banks have made bad business decisions. The banks have loaned money to corporations and third world countries that they know cannot repay the loan. And so the banks all of a sudden say, oh, our balance sheet is off. Our assets are down. We're going to go bankrupt. So instead of letting the banks go bankrupt like any other company would go bankrupt when it makes bad business decisions, they go to Congress, to their buddies, their partners in Congress, and they say, oh, you can't let the banks fail, because that'll be bad for America. It'll ruin America. Oh, yeah, we can't let the banks fail because that's bad for America. So therefore, they pass a vote. They raise their hands how much money they're going to create out of nothing. And by the way, the banks do that, too. They create the money. And who do they give it to? Three guesses, to the banks. That's where most of the money. So the banks create the money at the will of the Congress. They're authorized now to do it, but they would have found some way to do it anyway. But by having the Congress involved, it makes it look like Congress is responsible. And so they create the money out of nothing as a sort of a credit. It's available, and they bail out the banks. That's the first thing they always do, give it to the banks. So anyway, I'm rambling a little bit, but people are waking up to this scam, and sooner or later, I think it's going to come to a head, and which is one of the reasons, if we want to talk about the present situation, how it might be different. One of the reasons that everything seems to be accelerating, I believe, because I think these people know that if they just let the natural forces continue as they now are moving, people are waking up at an increasing rate. And this doesn't have to go too much longer before there's going to be quite an awakened public. And when we finally hit that tipping point, the game will be over.